a 45-year-old climber from West Bengal, India, has died near the summit of Mount Everest. During the descent, he began to show signs of extreme exhaustion and an altitude sickness. Ghosh eventually refused to continue the descent.
It was May 14th, 2025, and two men were preparing for what should have been the greatest achievement of their lives. One was getting ready to crawl into a tent at Camp 4. The other was starting his climb through the darkness toward Everest's summit. Within 24 hours, one of these men would become a medical mystery, and the other would make a decision so shocking that even tough mountaineers couldn't believe it. Today, I'm covering the Everest deaths of 2025 that shouldn't have happened. Deaths so psychologically disturbing that they challenge everything we think we know about human survival instinct. Welcome to the Extreme Edge. Around 8 p.m. on May 14th, 2025, campers at Everest Camp 4 watched as multiple headlamps swung into view as they walked right into their enclosure, crunching closer to the orange tents. Now, this was no big deal. At 26,000 feet, this cluster of orange tents is the last stop before the summit. It's also deep inside what climbers call the death zone. One of those lights belonged to Philip Santiago, a 45-year-old climber from the Philippines. Now, you should know Philip wasn't just another wealthy adventurer.
I am your regular blue-collar worker, and I identify with the average man's daily struggle to put food on the table. We are the underdogs.
He'd said in a Facebook post before the expedition, "We are the underdogs." As an engineer, he'd saved for years for this moment, but this wasn't just about personal glory. Santiago had made what he called a covenant with God to put deeper meaning to this practice of passion. He was climbing for children with cancer and communities without clean water. Climbing Mount Everest is very little compared to the battles these little warriors are facing every day, he'd said. He'd probably trained for months or even years for this moment. Most Everest climbers do. And now he was just 8 or 9 hours from the top of the world. He should have been happy. He should have been thrilled. His journey to the top of the world was almost complete. But something was wrong. Philip's teammates noticed his shoulders sagging. His words came in ragged, one-word bursts, and he was visibly exhausted. Instead of the excitement you'd expect from someone about to attempt the summit, Santiago looked defeated. He unclipped from the fixed line, crawled into the nearest orange tent, and told his colleagues what would be his last words. "I'll rest now," or something like that. Now, these simple, normal words are something that every exhausted climber has said, but his words would take on a haunting meaning by morning. See, here's what you need to understand about Camp 4 on Everest. Some climbers joke that it's the only campsite on Earth where you wake up sicker than when you went to bed, but it's not really a joke. It looks safe. I mean, look at it. Just a flat area covered in tents. But it's a trap. A parking lot in one of the most dangerous regions of Earth where climbers convince themselves they're resting when really they're racing against time. At 26,000 feet, your body is dying. Even lying completely still, your brain is starving for oxygen. Your lungs are slowly filling with fluid, molecule by molecule. Your heart is working triple time just to keep you alive. Most teams leave Camp 4 around midnight so they can reach the summit in the late morning and get back down before the afternoon winds build. That was Philip's plan too. As the team settled, Philip's tent mate was sorting gear for the midnight summit push. He glanced over at him, zipped up to his chin, eyes closed, breathing hard but steady. Nothing looked alarming. This was normal exhaustion, he probably thought. The hours ticked by. 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. When midnight arrived and alarms started chirping across Camp 4, Santiago's tent mate reached over to shake him awake. But there was one slight problem. Tiny detour on this chaos train. If you want more raw, uncut stories we can't show here, come join the Extreme community on Patreon. See you on the real Extreme Edge. He got no response. Worried, he shook him harder, probably thinking Santiago was just deeply asleep. Still, nothing. That's when he noticed. Philip had no pulse. His skin was already cooling. He quickly raised an alarm, but it was too late. In the time it had taken other climbers to melt snow for their summit push, Philip had died quietly, without a sound, without a struggle. The official cause of death, which came from the Department of Tourism on May 15th, was unknown suspected exhaustion or altitude illness. But doctors who understand high-altitude medicine know there are two silent killers at 26,000 feet. The first is high-altitude pulmonary edema. Your lungs fill with fluid and you essentially drown in your own body. The second is sudden cardiac arrest from overexertion. Either one can kill a healthy person in under an hour. Santiago had done some heavy climbing that afternoon, on Everest routes that push even the strongest climbers to their limits. He'd reached Camp 4 visibly exhausted. He likely lay down with microscopic fluid already building in his lungs. When he closed his eyes to rest, the drowning finished itself. Had he turned back the moment that deep fatigue set in, he probably almost certainly would have survived. I think what makes this death so unsettling to me is that a quick pulse ox check and an immediate descent, which is standard on many 26,000-foot peaks, would almost certainly have saved him. But on Everest, there's no park rule that forces teams to stop, and no ranger checks vitals at Camp 4. In the death zone, the act of lying down is a coin flip, and Philip drew the wrong side of that coin. But as painful as Philip's death was, what happened in our next story defies everything we understand about human survival instinct. To understand why this death is so unbelievable, you need to know a couple of things. First, the Hillary Step. Picture a 40-foot wall of rock and ice. Now put it at 28,700 feet, so high that commercial airplanes fly below you. The oxygen is so thin that your body is literally dying with every breath. One wrong move, and you fall 10,000 feet down the mountain. The Hillary Step is the last major obstacle before the summit of Everest. It's not a place where you rest, and it's not a place where you make decisions. It's a place where you move fast or you die. No guarantees, though. What happened at the Hillary Step on May 15th, 2025 goes against every survival instinct humans possess. Let's start 19 hours earlier, when everything seemed normal. This is the story of Subrata Ghosh. Subrata Ghosh had been dreaming of Everest for years. The 45-year-old from Ranagat, Bengal had done everything right. He'd trained his body, he'd saved his money, he'd hired a reputable company, Snowy Horizon Treks, and been assigned an experienced Sherpa guide named Palshan Tamang. On the night of May 14th, the two men prepared for their summit push. This is the moment every Everest climber lives for, the final ascent to the top of the world. But Ghosh made a decision that would cascade into tragedy. He wanted to start at 10 p.m. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but on Everest, timing is everything. Most climbers start their summit push between midnight and 2 a.m. Why? Because you need to reach the summit by late morning and get back down before the afternoon weather turns deadly. Starting at 10 p.m. meant they were already stretching their luck a bit on the schedule. The timing put them near the front of the summit queue with no teams already higher on the route. There'd be no early radio call warning of fresh wind or cloud. In other words, they were climbing blind. But Ghosh did not care. He was excited. Maybe too excited. Right from the very beginning, something was off. Ghosh was moving slowly, really slowly. In the beam of his headlamp, Sherpa Tamang, his guide, could see his client struggling with every step. I want you to imagine being Sherpa Tamang in this moment. You're responsible for this man's life. You can see he's moving too slowly, but you also know he's paid tens of thousands of dollars for this chance. He's trained for years. Do you turn him around? Do you crush his dreams? Tamang made a decision he would later regret. He kept going. Hour after hour, they climbed through the darkness. The temperature was negative 40 degrees. The wind was howling at 60 miles per hour. Every step required 3 or 4 gasping breaths. And Ghosh kept falling further behind schedule. On any guided climb, a pace this slow is a textbook signal to abort. If Nepal enforced strict turnaround rules like some countries do, Tamang could have pointed to the law. not just his judgment, and simply said, "We stop here." But they don't. And here's the thing about summit fever. It makes you ignore warning signs. Gosh had probably been visualizing this moment for years, standing on top of the world, achieving the impossible. That vision can be more powerful than pain, more powerful than exhaustion, and more powerful than logic. Tamang later said Gosh was overexcited and wouldn't listen to warnings. He kept pushing upwards, driven by a dream that was about to become a nightmare. As the sun rose on May 15th, they were still climbing, still pushing toward the summit, already dangerously behind schedule. Then, around 11 a.m., the weather changed. Another climber on the mountain that day, Suman Sarkar from Bardhaman, reported conditions so violent that he could only stand on the summit for 15 minutes. The wind speed was increasing every hour, turning the upper mountain into a frozen hell. But Gosh had come too far to turn back. Sometime in the afternoon, nobody knows exactly when, he finally made it. He stood on the summit of Everest, 29,032 feet, the highest point on Earth. For a brief moment, his dream had come true. What happened next is where this story takes a turn that nobody could have predicted. The descent started normally. If anything about stumbling down from 29,000 feet in hurricane-force winds can be called normal. Gosh was exhausted. He'd been in the death zone for over 16 hours. His oxygen was running low. His body was shutting down, but he was moving. He was descending, and he was going to make it. Then they reached the Hillary Step. Remember that 40-foot wall I described? It's even more dangerous on the way down. You're exhausted, you're oxygen deprived, you have to navigate it backwards. One slip means certain death. And right there, at the worst possible place on the entire mountain, Subrata Ghosh stopped moving. He turned to his Sherpa and spoke 4 words that should never be spoken in the death zone. "I can't see anything." That was pretty scary, but it was what he said next that made this one of the most disturbing deaths in Everest history. Because Ghosh didn't just say he couldn't see, he made a declaration that went against every human survival instinct. He said, "I won't move." I need you to understand how insane this is. When you're in danger, your body floods with adrenaline, your muscles prepare to fight or flee. Every cell in your body screams at you to move, to survive, to get to safety. But there's a third stress response we often overlook: freeze. It's what happens when your brain decides the threat is so overwhelming that neither fighting nor fleeing will work. Your body simply shuts down. Still, even knowing this, what Ghosh did next defies explanation. Because at 28,700 feet, in screaming winds and blowing snow, he didn't just freeze, he decided not to move. Now, Palshen Tamang immediately recognized what was happening. The sudden blindness, irrational behavior, and complete shutdown of normal decision-making all pointed to one thing. These were classic signs of severe altitude sickness. When your brain doesn't get enough oxygen, it stops working properly. You might hallucinate, you might lose your vision, you might make decisions that make no sense. But here's what makes Ghosh's case so disturbing. He didn't collapse, he didn't pass out, he simply made a conscious decision to stop trying. He literally sat down in a place called the death zone and gave up. What followed was 8 hours of hell that defies comprehension. First, Tamang tried reasoning with him. Just imagine it if you can. 2 men screaming at each other over howling winds, one begging the other to save his own life. "You have to move." "I won't." "You'll die." "I won't move." For hours, Tamang pleaded. He probably brought up everything he could think of. Ghosh's family back in Bengal, his achievement of reaching the summit, the fact that safety was just a few hours away. But Ghosh wouldn't move. So Tamang did something that shows the incredible dedication of Sherpa guides. He decided to physically drag his client down the mountain. For 4 excruciating hours in the dark, in the death zone, Tamang pulled, pushed, and carried Gosh down the Hillary step. Every movement was agony. Every foot of progress took superhuman effort. And after 4 hours of this torture, they had moved just 300 feet. That's about the length of a football field, and it had taken that long. I try to imagine the physical toll this took on Temang. At sea level, carrying another person 300 feet would be exhausting. At 28,000 feet, where there's only 1/3 the oxygen your body needs, it's almost impossible. So it's no surprise that after those 4 hours, Temang collapsed next to Gosh. Both men sat there in the snow above the clouds in the death zone, and Temang faced a realization that would haunt him forever. His oxygen was running out. The brutal math of Everest is that you carry a limited supply of oxygen. Use too much and you die. Run out and you die. Share it with someone else and you both die. Temang had been in the death zone for almost 16 hours. He'd spent 8 of those hours trying to save a man who wouldn't save himself. His own body was failing. Frostbite was setting in. His brain was starting to malfunction from a lack of oxygen. And still, he stayed with Gosh for as long as he could. But as their oxygen supplies dwindled to nothing, Temang faced the kind of decision that no training prepares you for. In survival situations, people have done incredible things. They've cut off their own arms to escape. They've drunk their own waste to survive. They've eaten things I can't even mention here. But leaving someone behind, someone you're responsible for, someone who's still alive, still breathing, still sitting there in the snow, that's a different kind of survival decision. In the end, Temang chose life. He left Subrata Gosh sitting in the snow near the Hillary step and began his own desperate descent, alone, in the dark, without supplemental oxygen. What happened next shows just how close Temang came to joining Gosh on the mountain. As he descended, Temang's oxygen-starved brain began to malfunction. He started hallucinating, seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices in the wind. At one point, he couldn't remember where he was or what he was doing. Imagine trying to navigate one of the most dangerous descents in the world while your brain is playing tricks on you. Every step could send you tumbling thousands of feet. Every decision could be your last. And all the while, you're morally carrying the weight of the man you left behind, the promise you couldn't keep, the life you couldn't save. Somehow, through sheer will or mountain luck, Temang made it. He stumbled into Camp 4 at sunrise after being in the death zone for nearly 20 hours. His fellow climbers found him with severe frostbite, babbling incoherently, more dead than alive. It took him 2 full days to recover enough to explain what had happened up there in the darkness near the Hillary step. When search teams finally reached the Hillary step, they found Subrata Gosh exactly where Temang had left him. He was still sitting in the same position, still wearing all his gear, frozen solid in the position where he'd decided to give up. The 3 words that had sealed his fate, "I won't move," had become his epitaph. What makes this death so disturbing isn't just that Gosh died on Everest. People die on Everest every year. It's that he chose to die. He sat down in the most dangerous place on Earth and refused to try to save himself. Sure, Gosh had been in the death zone for over 16 hours when he sat down. His body was shutting down. His brain was malfunctioning from lack of oxygen. But other climbers have survived longer in the death zone. Other climbers have pushed through similar exhaustion. What made Gosh different? Why did he give up when others keep fighting? Now, I've read dozens of accounts of altitude sickness, and while it affects decision-making, it doesn't typically make people give up entirely. Most climbers, even when severely impaired, still have some survival instinct driving them to descend. Subrata seemed to have made a conscious choice to die on that mountain rather than give up his summit achievement. It's like once he reached the top, some part of him decided that was enough, that he'd rather die having accomplished his dream than live knowing he had to abandon it. As you can imagine, Temang's decision raised some eyebrows. One side argues that a guide should never abandon their client regardless of the circumstances. The other side says he did the only rational thing, that staying would have meant 2 deaths instead of 1. But I think there's a third possibility that no one's talking about. What if Subrata wanted to be left alone? What if he had already decided his fate, and Tamang's attempts to save him were actually prolonging his suffering? I don't know. It's a dark thought, but it might explain why an otherwise rational person would sit down in the death zone and refuse to move, even when faced with certain death. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. When you calmly look at it though, Ghosh's death wasn't just one bad decision, it was a cascade of preventable choices. Any experienced climber watching would have been screaming, "Turn around," at multiple points. But without enforced rules, and with summit fever clouding judgment, the tragedy rolled on. Personally, I think the courage Palchen Tamang showed, first in trying to save Ghosh for 8 hours, then in making the hardest decision of his life, was remarkable. While it makes the tragedy even more heartbreaking, it reminds me that even in the worst situations, people can show incredible strength. Tamang could have left immediately when Ghosh sat down. He could have saved himself hours of agony and risk, but he stayed. He tried. He gave everything he had until he had nothing left to give. What would you do if someone you were responsible for just gave up? If they sat down in a deadly place and refused to move? How long would you try to save them? How much would you risk? That's the real story here. Not just that a man gave up in the death zone, but that another man refused to give up on him until he absolutely had to. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.